Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining Dion Leadership this morning as we are talking about sustaining relationships. I have our CEO, Steve Dion, with us today, and he's going to introduce our guests for this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are excited and very interested to explore this topic that we think is very timely right now on maintaining healthy relationships through stressful life events. And I'm delighted to be joined by two of our esteemed coaches and consultants that work with Dion Leadership. And let me give you a quick introduction and background. But first, welcome, Rob and Michael. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Steve.
Pleasure to be here, Steve.
So Dr. Rob Pasick is a prolific writer and featured speaker on the intricacies and complexities of the human condition. Through a blend of his skills as a Harvard-educated psychologist and University of Michigan trained executive coach, he helps clients reach their optimal performance. Rob has written 8 books, resulting in appearances on Oprah, the National Public Radio, and other places. In addition, he served as an advisor to companies that lost employees during the New York City 9/11 events, and has provided services to the president of Rwanda during the country's period of genocide. So as you can see, Rob's very accomplished in this subject. Friend of Rob is Michael, equally as accomplished. Michael Samuelson has lectured across the world on leadership, population health, patient experience, and men's health, as well as dynamics of behavioral change. He's an author of 5 books and numerous articles on leadership and behavior change. This work's been featured on ABC News, 2020, CBS Morning Show, CNN, the list goes on and on. And he has written and done a lot of work in behavior change, and it's been distributed in millions of places across the world through different scientific publications. And he has been endorsed by people including former President George W. Bush, Betty Ford, Ken Blanchard, and Larry King. So I am excited to unpack some wonderful life experiences with 2 amazing folks that I just have an honor to be associated with and who coach our people within our organization. So welcome again. Let's talk a little bit about teeing up the subject, and I really want to be able to just turn the floor over to the 2 of you and explore some areas and ideas. But for those of you on the call that don't know who Dion Leadership is, we wake up every day to help organizations start excited and end accomplished. We really believe that if you have employees that are engaged and excited, it creates better business results and better societies. So this subject fits squarely into that mission of what we do and what we deliver, and we deliver that through a team of over 50 amazing coaches and consultants like Rob and Michael. Our services are on the screen here, and as you can see, they dovetail really nicely with this idea of healthy relationships. We spend a lot of time, whether we're doing individual coaching, doing leadership competency development and leadership programs, working with executive teams, or assessing talent to come into organizations or building organizational capabilities, all around this subject of relationships and how relationships need to be healthy to create better business results. And these are a lot of the clients that we work with. And as we came up with this subject, or the list of subjects that we talk about each month, we see many of these organizations struggling with the relationships they have in the corporate world, but also the relationships that they have individually as we coach people and how they interact with others in their own personal life. So as we go into the subject today, I wanted to at least start by sharing this list of some of the relationships. This is not an exhaustive list of relationships that you have, but as we go through this conversation today, you may want to jot down 2 or 3 of these that you say, this is a relationship I'd like to pursue further. I don't know how healthy it is. And then as we go through this, maybe jot down some ideas or resources that you might use to help kind of reframe those relationships in your life to be healthy. So what we're going to do today is we want to have, and for those of you that have been on other webinars, we've used a lot of slides in the past to sometimes unpack a topic in a leadership space, or we've been focusing more on realizing that our audience tends to be leadership development professionals and how to build capabilities within an organization. But we're making a concerted effort today to focus on insights and tools and resources to help you both build healthy relationships in your organization for how you show up, but how you can build programs and systems, but also in your personal life and what this might look like. So no real slides, a rich conversation, have some questions to ask our panelists. So I'm going to turn off our slides in a second, but I just also ask that you be active in asking any questions as we go through this. Lauren and I will be proctoring chat, and we will stop and make sure that your questions, hopefully all of them, can get answered. And if they don't, we can follow up with you after this event. So let me turn off these slides real quick. And let me start, gentlemen, with, I know I gave a more formal background, but if you could just start quickly with helping us understand your personal experiences and professional experiences as it relates to the topic of relationships, so we can sort of get into a little bit more of your background related to this topic. Rob, you want to start?
Sure. Well, it's interesting talking about how to sustain relationships, but it's also a good way of thinking about how do you sustain yourself during times of stress, and it is through relationships. You have to have strong relationships to get through these tough times. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily live with people, but you have to have people to help you. And I think the people who are isolated are the ones who are having the most struggle. So those that are healthy already in relationships probably are having an easier time of it right now because they are doing the things that they need to do. And that is reaching out to people, making a primary effort to get along. That's a big term. What does it mean to get along with people? But if you think about it, we learn this from the earliest ages about how to get along. We teach our little children. I'm actually with my grandchildren this week in New York City. And, I see them struggling to get along. I see their friends struggling to get along with them. Some kids have great natural skills. Others, it's a big struggle. But I think that during these stressful times, those people that have good emotional intelligence, that can read other people well, that can be sensitive and empathetic, are doing better in terms of sustaining well-being during this time. So I'll let Mike comment on it, and we go from there.
Yeah, just to give a kind of an overview, it really is not as complicated as sometimes we make it. It's about honesty, it's about integrity, it's about clarity. And Rob mentions grandchildren, and I've got 5 beautiful grandkids, and they range in age from 2 years of age to 9 years of age. And there's nothing more honest than a little child who will look at you and say exactly what's on their mind. And you don't have to wonder, what did he mean by that? Or what did she imply by that? Or what is exactly going on? And then as the children get older and older and older, they become socialized, which means they begin to nuance their speech. And all of a sudden, it's not quite as clear because we're afraid to give direct communication. So my overreaching has always been honesty and integrity in terms of your relationships with people. And business and life is all about building and maintaining relationships. And for me, that's always been an understanding that you're accepted, respected, and secure in your relationship with me unless I tell you differently. And so once you get into that raw honesty of, I accept you as an individual, I respect your skill set that you bring into personal and professional relationships, and your relationship with me is absolutely secure unless I tell you differently. And when I tell you, I will give you some suggestions. But it avoids all of this oblique speak that we often use. We use these conditional words because we're afraid to use direct words because of the reaction. So real simple stuff our moms and dads taught us years ago, and we learned from little people. Honesty and integrity, be direct with your conversations.
So guys, relationships are, I think people would say, are challenging in any given day throughout your whole life. But this year in particular, we're talking about a global pandemic where we've been staying at home a lot, where we have virtual relationships. We don't see each other in person. We have masks. I know we want to talk a little bit about that today. We have very differing opinions between people in terms of ideology, whether it's, obviously politically this week in terms of which side of the aisle you're on related to this election. It's our social justice movement and different people's opinions and views. So we've been particularly challenged this year on that. So let me start and get a little bit more personal. How are you each doing personally and relates to your relationships and in your work and personal life?
Well, I have to be honest, it's a struggle. And I think, Mike, go ahead. You started. I'll let you go first this time.
Well, I'm just going to say that not to keep repeating this, but if you have relationships that are built on honesty, integrity, and clarity, it really is not that difficult. The issue is that, and I love the Bernard Shaw quote, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So we have an assumption that somebody knows exactly how we feel or exactly what we're saying, when most people, the communication is way more nonverbal or nuanced than it is direct. So in my family and in my relationships, there is this default that says you are accepted, respected, and secure. And so no matter what happens, you're going to hear it straight. The other challenge is, and this is related to the mask issue, when we do speak, we speak with our eyes, but we speak with our mouth, we speak with our shoulders, we speak with our feet, we speak in so many nonverbal ways. And when we start to take those away, it becomes critically important that our verbal communication is very honest and direct. An example, a lot of people who wear masks, they may have difficulty hearing. I'm one of those. I have a hearing issue. And so if I'm seeing somebody and I have a mask on, well, it's important for me to see their mouth because I have to read their lips as well. But I also want to know if they're smiling, if there's consternation, what the emotion is. And so I have to be very direct and say, I'm not sure what you meant by that. Can you give me some more information? So we have to ferret out much more than we used to by limiting our sensory contact with individuals. So be honest, be open, be clear.
Steve, I wanted to pick up on one aspect of this from your question about how are we coping. I find one of the hardest relationships to manage is the relationship I have with myself, because I have certain expectations, and all of a sudden my routines are off, my daily activities are off. I'm restricted in what I like to do. I'm kind of an outgoing person. I spend a lot of time at coffee shops or just out talking to people, and I'm finding that my own personal relationship with myself is strained, and I come to that through self-awareness. And I think that that's the key and the cornerstone to managing relationship, is to understand yourself well. That doesn't mean to dwell on yourself, because as my friend Mike Samuelson tells me, we're not the center of the universe. I'm not, nobody is, but that we start with our own self-awareness. Are we aware of how we feel? Are we aware how to take good care of ourselves? And I think this is a struggle right now. How do we sustain ourselves during this relationship? And how do we find the right balance between sustaining ourselves, sustaining our relationship with our significant other? And then if we're at work, we have a lot of people to manage, and those people are variable. I talked to a woman yesterday who manages quite a few people. Her biggest problem is her people are overworking because there's no boundaries. So people are working all hours of the day and night to try to keep up. And she's trying to tell them, hey, set some boundaries. Other people who have a lot of responsibilities are maybe not working enough. So there's a lot of variability with that.
There's two things I want to add to that. One is pay attention to that 3 a.m. version of yourself. And you know what I mean by that, the voice that when you're all alone by yourself and it comes up, and issues will come up when you're in that conscious or semi-conscious state that need addressing. And so pay attention, listen to both your daydreams and your night dreams. The other part of that is recognize, and not to be corny, but it does take a village. So my wife and I are in a situation where we have time. So I want to do some personal development. So I've read more, I've written more, I've learned additional skills. And as Rob just said, my mantra is Tanam, and that's Tinam, which simply stands for this is not about me. So how can I enhance my village? And in my case, we've got, like you guys have got, I've got children, or you've got children, and you're trying to take care of your professional responsibilities. Reach out to people around you who have the bandwidth. So we're able to take the grandchildren more, so that our children who work at home are able to work at home. We're able to provide additional financial support where that is needed. And again, because we've had a very open relationship, we don't have to kind of guess in terms of what needs are. So I keep coming back, and you're going to hear it more and more. It's the honesty, it's the integrity and clarity. Those are critical keys. And to Rob's point, it starts with you. And you can't put up a facade and say, well, I'm okay, when you're having demonstrations, personal demonstrations that say, well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe you're experiencing more physical issues than you would ordinarily, and you can't trace exactly what is the etiology, where did this come from? So to be reflective. The other part of that is friendship, 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 friendship. And when speaking primarily about men, because it tends to be more of an issue for men, you need buddy time. You need honest relationships where you can reach out to somebody and they say, how you doing? And your reflex isn't to say, I'm great, how you doing? If you're not feeling good, to be able to say, Rob, you know what, I'm having a hard time with this. And so I could use some counsel. I could use some advice. I could use maybe just a sounding board. For men die of embarrassment much more than they die from pathology, because they don't want to admit when they're vulnerable. So use your village, be honest to yourself, and listen to that quiet and not so quiet voice that shows up in the dead of night. Yeah.
Like I have an example of that. We're all afraid of the COVID right now, and we're seeing it strike people. And I was reading an interview with Tom Izzo today, and he was talking in a very raspy voice. He looked tired about catching the virus. And he said he couldn't understand how it happened because he was very rigid about staying away from all the things that would have exposed him to it. But I keep hearing, when people are sick with the virus, you ask them how they are, or they're interviewed and asked how they are. They say, oh, I'm doing fine. I got the virus, but I'm not that sick. And then later on you read, well, they spent 4 days in the hospital, or, they really were, they talk about the illness afterwards and how sick they were and how uncomfortable they were, how worried they were. But when you ask them during it, it's, I'm fine. Everything's great. Everything's great, Jack, people often will say. But I think you're right, Mike. People die of embarrassment. They don't want to go to the doctor until it's too late. They don't want to take care of themselves. And that's the first step, I think, in caring for relationships, is caring for self.
Yeah,
So
the other thing
to be vulnerable, you're saying, being able to say, I'm not feeling great today. And how do you do that at work? How does that conversation sound when it's your direct employee or your peer?
It's interesting because right now, the worst thing is to go into work when you may not be feeling well. And, you do hear people that kind of deny that they're not feeling well, and then they actually expose other people to their disease. So it's very important right now to be self-aware of your body and what it's telling you. And if you don't feel sick, you're a little bit sick, stay home, stay away from other people, keep a mask on, all those kinds of things. But I think it is important, and maybe this is opening things up today to how do we share vulnerabilities with people, because we all are vulnerable. We're all scared. We're all worried about what the outcomes of this and that will be. There's going to be half of us that were disappointed in the election. Half of us were worried about it before, and now there's half that are worried about it afterwards. So, it is a time of vulnerability.
The part of this, and by the way, both Rob and I have written extensively on these issues. And so Steve, through Dion Leadership, will have access to short articles that we've written that cover these subjects. So don't worry about taking a lot of copious notes around this. And part of the beauty of not doing a PowerPoint is it lets us just talk from, quite honestly, close to 100 years of experience in the field that both Rob and I have. The other part of it is to make sure that you develop outside interests, because it's very easy to become a COVID casualty if you focus in on that. And the issue is that very often problems or worries they're fictional, they haven't happened. So we're the writer, we're designing the scripts and we're creating really horrible scenarios. Well, since it's all fictitious, and not to be a Pollyanna, but start working on scripts where things are good in your life, they are good with your family, they are good with your corporation, and then start to work toward that end. And again, keep in mind that as you imagine things, things do begin to evolve. There is such a thing as self-fulfilling prophecy. And so you have to be careful. The other part of it, because somebody asked me, how do I deal with all of this? Quite honestly, other than the thing that at nauseam I keep repeating, is I get my camera, I walk out into the woods, and I just embrace nature, because nature is always there to be embraced. Whatever your spirituality may be, embrace whatever is out there that makes you feel comfortable, the smile of a child, the Milky Way, the change of the seasons, the sound of your feet as they crumple leaves as you walk through the woods. Concentrate on the sensory gifts that we all have that make us feel good. And again, if you've got little ones around you, just enjoy their honesty. My 5-year-old the other day looked at me the other day and he said, well, Grandpa, when I become a daddy, you'll be dead. And I said, well, let me do the math on that. I said, I've got hope that maybe he said, well, okay, but when I'm a grandpa, you'll be dead. And I'm like, yep, you're probably right. I will be. And he's not being insulting. He's expressing what he is feeling and trying to cope with that idea. And so by not overreacting, it's wonderful. And then he said the other day, you'll be in the graveyard. And then he pointed to the sky. This was Halloween. He pointed to the sky and he said, nope, you'll be up there with Chaucer. And Chaucer's our family dog who passed away about 3 weeks ago. So the kids are trying to wrap their minds around grief, around reality, around past, present, and future. We lose that as we get older because it's not sophisticated to think in those terms. I encourage everyone, get in touch with the 8-year-old, the 5-year-old, little girl, little boy inside you, and ask them, what would you say? What would you do in this situation? And take advice from your younger self.
Thanks, Michael. That's a great example of something that I think is a teaching point here too, that we can listen and should listen in our adult relationships, whether it's professional or personal, for what people are saying and why. And, you can, like you said, you just peel that back to something that's much deeper than the question itself. So taking a pause and being able to assess what is going on in a relationship by how somebody, what they ask, what they don't ask, how they're thinking, how they're feeling. I've also heard you both say things around this idea of maybe the word would be sort of be proactive in yourself. Choose to set up that male conversation that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Choose to go out in nature, like make a plan for your day versus just let it sort of swoop you into whatever happens. How do you do that, practically speaking? How do you, demands? I know one of the questions that came in on the work side is, if you have a demanding boss who's just like work 24/7, how do you put up your hand and say, I need some me time? Or if it's at home or with the kids, how do you choose to say and not feel guilty about, I need some of my own individual time?
Well, I think, Rob, go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's important to put up that hand. It's hard during the pandemic if you haven't done this before, but with all employers, it's important to set boundaries and let people know that you are giving a big portion of your life, but not your whole life, to the work. And a lot of times we try to keep up with what the boss is doing, and the boss is texting in the middle of the night or expecting an answer to an email on Sunday night. So I think it's important to set those boundaries and say, look, this is when I am working and this is when I have responsibilities. And it's not just, you don't have to say what the responsibilities are, because some people have children, some people don't, but still you have the right to to set boundaries and say, this is my life. This is the time that I'm giving to Acme Photo or whatever it is. And this is the time that I'm giving to myself. One of the things that I do, I'm going to show a little illustration here, my notebook that I carry around. I've been carrying these for years. And what I do is on the right side, you probably can't read the writing, but I write the words, today would be a great day if I, and I start with I because I'm saying, what can I take control of today? And so maybe it's, if I could get the report to my boss by 3 p.m., or it's maybe if I could get out into the woods and take a picture, or if I could walk around the block, or if I could help my daughter get her responsibilities done by taking care of her kids for a while. So the one thing that if at the end of the day, you feel is really important, you can get that done. Often we make a long list, but we don't prioritize. We have 5 or 6 or 10 things on there. So I like this thing. Today will be a great day if I, starting the day with that question. And then I list like 3 things that I can get, I'd really beyond that I'm trying to do today. No more than 3. On the left side of the page, I write, some people call it gratitudes. I call it 2 things. One is abundances of the day, things that just were special that happened today. Like yesterday for me, it was making toast and jelly with my granddaughter, Sammy. And, that was just a precious 5-minute experience for me where she was totally present and I was totally present. And we had to wait for the toaster to pop. And that's a memory that I'll have for a long time. The second thing I write on the left-hand side is lessons learned. And people say, well, wait a minute, you're going to be 74 years old, Rob. You're still learning lessons? And I say every day, and there's people are around me, fortunately, to teach me those lessons by giving me feedback, some of it positive, some of it negative. Another example, I was, I don't have a lot of times with my granddaughters. So I was with them last night and I'm looking at my screen instead of being with them. And my son said, Dad, what are you looking at? And I thought, I'm looking at the newest recruit for the Michigan basketball team. And I got to pop myself in the head and say, that's a total waste of my time. I have very precious little time. The kids are taking their bath. I could be in there playing with them and getting ready for their nighttime routine. And instead, I'm looking up the Michigan basketball team, which I could care less about.
You young people being on your phones all the time, Rob.
Yeah, so those phones are really distractions. I try to delete.
Yeah.
And I told people to do this if they feel frustrated by how much time they're spending on a certain app, just delete the app and make a commitment to not reestablish it for at least a week. So I don't have
great
Facebook on my
ideas.
app list anymore. If I want to look at Facebook, I've got to reload it and everything else. And I've made a commitment not to watch it for 6 weeks. And see what I miss when I get back to it. Probably nothing. So
let me go back to that question in terms of the work site, because I have a rule in life and it's called a no jerks rule. And so I don't allow jerks in my life. Now, that's easy for me to say. I'm in a position where I don't have to, but there are different times in your life where the reality is you are either working with as a colleague or working for somebody who you question in terms of their motives, their honesty, their integrity, their clarity, all those issues we talked about. It's so important in those situations that communication be crystal clear. So if you're working for a boss who tends to be oblique, uses a lot of conditional, it's real important to say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Are you saying that I, by 2:00 this afternoon, need to have this paper in this location? Is that what I'm hearing you say? And then they can get clarification. And then you go, great, that's fine. Even walking back to your office, you send, and this is where text is valuable. Great chatting with you quickly in the hall. My understanding is you want this paper on somebody's desk by 2:00. If that's not the case, just let me know. Reach out constantly so that individual can come back and say, wait a second, you walked down there 3 steps and turn right. I told you walk down 3 steps and turn left. And then you can say, sir, ma'am, with all respect, let me refer you to our conversation. And if we need more clarity, let's have the discussion. So with dignity, with respect, by the way, that goes up and down, always look for that opportunity to show that you're accepted, respected, and secure, and if not, give reasons for it. That's the most important part. I've written a number of books My macro editor on my first 2 books was my brother, who was creative writing professor at the University of Southern California, twice named Professor of the Year. When we entered into the relationship where he did my initial macro editing, I was no longer his brother, but I was always accepted, respected, and the relationship was secure. That allowed him and me to say, oh my goodness, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. Let me show you how you can do it, or I can give you recommendations. So you preserve the relationship, but you emphasize the importance of the clarity. If the no jerk rule gets to the point where you find yourself saying, I got to put up with this for 3 more years before I can do X, understand that you're writing a script that says you're going to be pretty miserable for the next 3 years. And you have to get to a point where you do the approach avoidance, you do the liability, the asset evaluation in terms of what is this worth in my life to go through this kind of aggravation that's causing me to go through 5 rolls of Tums every single day. I snap at my kids, I'm not sleeping at night, and I've got all kinds of nervous conditions. At what cost are you willing to put up with jerks in your life? Oh, by the way, if every time you turn around there's a jerk in your life, you might want to look in the mirror. Because sometimes you're the catalyst for this. And that goes back to what Rob was talking about initially, that you have to do that. So there you go.
Thanks, Michael. And tying
Hey,
that.
Steve, I had a question.
I
saw
go ahead.
a comment. Somebody asked, what notebook do you recommend? I think it's important to have a notebook, whatever works for you. I've been using these little ones from this company called Daytimer, and I like them because they fit in my pocket. They're like a 3x5, like an index card, and I can just keep it in my pocket. And I've been keeping them since 1985. They have a monthly 2-page version of it. I also have written a plug here. One of my books is called The Journal for Self-Aware, and it's a journal which gives you pages to do this for 90 days. So that's available on Amazon. It's called The Journal for Self-Aware. But there are great books out there now. The bookstores are full of wonderful journals that help you capture some of these great ideas.
And we'll share, when we send out the recording to this, everybody will share the link to that place to find that book too. And I have to tell you, Rob, I've used it myself, and it's really helped me in being more focused in how I approach my daily life. And I really loved your idea or thought earlier about the idea of using abundance or gratitude. There's so much research out there that says when we find some level of gratitude in our day, for things that we have, how it's calming from a neuroscience perspective. And so your point earlier about, and to kind of tie your 2 points together, I'm hearing, especially if you have a challenging relationship in your life, whether it's a boss like we talked about, or it's somebody personally, is to, set boundaries of what's appropriate for me to be able to be comfortable with keeping that relationship going. And then from there, if you state that I statement, the I want to do out of today is this one thing, and prioritize that based on the conditions I have in my life at the time, then at the end of the day, you can reflect and hopefully find some gratitude. And I only picked one thing and I did it, and I feel good about myself, and I can move it forward and do it at kind of a one day at a time event. And we can get from point A to point B through that process. Let's talk a little bit.
I also want to say to that question, Steve, one other point about that, and that is, Mike said, be careful about working for jerks. I also think it's important to be careful about working for people who think they are kings or queens, and expect that they have an entourage around them, expect somebody to be available 24/7, much like King Henry and Lord Cromwell. We're not living in the court of the king, and the boss has to realize they're a boss, they're not a king, and they're not a god. And so if that's the type of boss you're working for, it's not sustainable. I mean, most of the coaching that we do, Mike, and through you, Steve, is, a lot of problems are people who are working for people who they do not get along well with because they expect them to treat them like royalty. And that's just, if you have that, you can't keep doing that for very long. Unless you happen to be working for a real king, in which case, great, okay. But there's only a few of those left in the world.
Right.
The other part of that kind of parallel is that, and I always say this to individuals, I do a lot of executive coaching at the C level, and I will say to somebody, who would benefit from your failure? And it always stops them for a second. So what do you mean? I said, would there be anybody who would benefit from you failing? And it forces people to start thinking about that question. Is somebody sabotaging either consciously or subconsciously? And if you sense that it's there, either overtly or they don't realize it's happening, it's so important that you have the conversation with the individual and just say, Steve, I think we're getting along really well, but I'm concerned because I get some vibes from you. It's actually some nonverbals that say you're pretty upset with me this week. Can we have that conversation? And Steve can say, oh gosh, no, I've had a bellyache all week, and every time I look at anybody, I cringe because it's my stomach. So look for clarification. The other part of it, behind every question, there is a concern, and imprint that, emblaze that someplace so you don't forget it. Behind every question is a concern. Am I going to have that report on my desk on Wednesday? Yes, you are. There's a concern. So you need to follow that and say, I'm sensing there's something else there. Do you need it before then? Is there another priority you'd like me to work on? Is there something else that we can do to make that happen? Don't leave it alone. If somebody says to you, can you tell me where the drinking fountain is? And you start to say to them, well, it's right down around the corner and you can do this. It almost is, are you thirsty? Can I help you find somebody? There's something there that's not part of the overt conversation. And very often that will stop the potential conflict. And by the way, if there is a conflict, that's good. Conflicts are good when you play fair. It just means there's an opportunity for a compromise, but you've got to be able to surface it and not be oblique in terms of understanding what somebody's intentions are and being concerned that they're nefarious. Have the conversation.
Great practical advice there. I'm hoping everybody's writing a lot of these great points down here. So related to that, let me probe one thing further. So I know in conversations that we're having into some of this chat here that, there's a balance between owning, being vulnerable and having the conversation you just said and opening up dialogue. And some people may be a jerk and you got to challenge that through these appropriate ways and set boundaries. The other side of that is, what do you do with people that have a different approach or ideology? I mean, right now with this political election, there's a lot of people on each side of this fence. And when do you engage? When do you not engage in that conversation? And when do you decide to agree to disagree? And what's the balance between having a conversation and choosing to say, this isn't a conversation that's healthy for me to have, whether it's personally or professionally?
That's a really good question. I dipped into those waters the other day, and we have a Facebook group. I went to Ferndale High School, and so we have a Ferndale High School Facebook group from the 1960s. Everybody who graduated in the 1960s can join it. And there's no written rules, but there's been kind of an unwritten rule: we don't get talking political. Well, when my candidate won, I'll be a little bit out there with it. I put a yes, on my page, and people got, then they reacted to, what do you mean yes? And, they kind of figured out I was celebrating, and they kind of called me out about that. And the idea was, you can't really talk about politics on this page. Well, I started to think about it. What is it about our culture that we can't talk about these certain kind of things? It used to be religion or money. Now it's politics. But we are who we are, and I think the worst part is when people start attacking the other person, like, well, I can't understand how you could like that person, or how could you believe that person is going to help us? So it's not just like, okay, I'm identifying, but it's more about attacking the beliefs and underlying, how could you be such a stupid person to believe that? And I think anytime you start categorizing people and calling them names, that's a problem. I think St. Francis, I'm not Catholic, but I do like St. Francis. And he said years ago, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So I think if you do encounter differences, it's worthwhile to have a conversation. Well, tell me why you believe that. The economy is going to be a lot better under candidate A than B. Well, let's understand why that is. but not to start to debate it. I think that's where things really go wrong. We start to debate it, and how could you feel that way, and you're stupid, and I'm more educated than you, or this or that. So I think what ends up happening for the most part in the workplace is people don't talk about politics, but they make assumptions about it anyway. And I think if we did more of seeking to understand and asking good questions rather than trying to get our point of view across, because we know in our hearts and in our minds, we're not going to change anybody else's opinion. But maybe we could change ourselves a little bit by trying to understand where that person's coming from.
Well, and on top of that, I'd add the diversity, inclusion, and equity conversations that need to be had as well. I mean, it's one thing to have political ideologies that probably aren't going to go away, but a lot of our clients that we're working with are really working hard to take what's happened in the broader landscape to advance, belonging and equity and inclusion in the workplace. So if you don't have those conversations, you don't move things forward. At the same token, who do you have them with? How do you do that so you don't get yourself into not even, I mean, we were talking about sustaining relationships. We don't want to break relationships either. So any comments on that space, on the DE&I space?
My issue on that is a couple of things. One is when you enter into that room with that individual, don't bring in keep the booze out of it. This is not a conversation you have over drinks at a bar someplace. Keep anger out of it and keep fatigue out of it. If you want to have a rational argument, like Rob says, if you've got a political or a religious or whatever your point of view is, the response needs to be, that's really, really interesting. Please help me understand that perspective. What's the fact basis for your position? Because I want to learn. I don't want to just pontificate my position. I want to learn your position. And then you can listen and begin to separate the emotion from fact base, and then you start getting into sourcing in terms of the information. And like I said, keep anger, keep alcohol, and keep fatigue out of these conversations. I'm talking about in the home as well. I can't imagine the challenge that happens when you have all of these issues and they're confined within the four walls of your home. So at the work site, the boss has to be a person of integrity. The coworker has to be a person of integrity. The individual he reports to, it all has to do with integrity, honesty, and clarity. And if you accept respect and you've got a secure relationship, unless you tell differently, you can have these conversations. And it's important to say, Rob, the other day we were talking about something, and we've been able to maintain relationships for about 35 years. And some of us go back 50, 60 years with people we went to school with. We are anchored with solid relationships that go for years and years and years. Don't blow them up because of a difference that is emotionally based. It's best at times in those situations to say, let's just agree to keep this out. Politics is transitory. Friendships are decade, lifelong treasures. Let's not throw them away because of some kind of ideological or situational or misinformation on either one of our parts. Have conversations with it. Otherwise, it becomes oblique and it becomes passive aggressive. And all of a sudden, you've destroyed relationships and neither one of you know why. You just know you're not talking anymore.
I want to comment on the diversity aspect of it too, Steve. And that is, I think when actually people are living and working together from different backgrounds, they find a way to work it out. It's more the fear about people who live isolated, and don't encounter other people that fear that those people are going to be a threat to them. I happen to be staying in Queens this week, and I'm in the zip code, which is the most diverse zip code in the country. And I walk down the street. It's rare for me to hear a conversation in English. I don't even know what some of the languages are. Probably the predominant one is Spanish. But people are getting along. People find a way to respect each other and really talk to each other and not get into fights with each other because they know that's what they have to do. One of my clients a few years ago with Blue Care Network, they have a big office in Southfield, and they were a very diverse workplace and people got along. I'm sure there were differences and people had dislikes and likes, but you'd go in the lunchroom and people were eating together across racial divides. It wasn't like high school where people would go into their little cliques and only hang out there. So I think that some of the fears come from people who are not living in those diverse cultures and fear that they will have to, and somehow that will be terrible. But the people who are living in those diverse cultures find, it's enriching, it's fun. It's great to walk down the street here and I can decide to eat at a Colombian restaurant or a Tibetan restaurant or a Mexican restaurant or Italian. What I can't find is I can't really help but my life be richer for that experience. So I think that's where we're going to find out the benefit of this. And our country has always really been that way. It's never been one dominant culture. It's been a mix of cultures.
I think that's real important, Robin. It's also, be careful of arrogance. Part of what I do is I'm a mountaineer, so I climb mountains, Asia, Africa, South America, and I still do these kinds of activities. When I go into these countries, the first thing I ask is, tell me about your country. Tell me about your culture. What are you most proud of? And they light up, and I hear all of what makes them wake up in the morning and want to go forward. And it's very different, quite often, than my experience as an American growing up in the Midwest. And so ask the questions, show an interest. The other part of it, you've got probably 3, maybe 4 generations at the work site. The people who are in their 20s more likely are not listening to the same music that Rob and I listen to. And Rob and I are in a position now where we might be your board chairman or sitting on the board or still be your CEO. You need to have these intercultural discussions about what is it about the music and what's the message, because I'm not getting the message behind this, or why this food and why this clothes and why this hair, whatever it is. But don't come at it from, my position is one of superiority. Come at it as the beginner's mind. Anybody who's followed Buddhism, it's all about the beginner's mind. Walk in asking the question, what? Come in learning something. Don't come in and say, now listen to what I have to teach you. Beginner's mind is critical. That, again, going back to the small children, it is a beginner's mind. They will keep asking and asking and asking. And if they think you look funny, they'll tell you, Grandpa, you look funny, or you look old, or you look, and it's wonderful to have that before all of a sudden we're socialized out of it. So to Rob's point, invest in, enjoy, embrace multicultural organizations and communities.
So how do we do some of these activities that you're talking about for the next many organizations, at least 6 months, that are going to be working remote? They're going to be doing it in the way that we're talking right now. They have meetings, 6, 8, 10 meetings a day in this context. So they don't bump into each other in a lunchroom and say, oh, you're eating this. Tell me about, what that food is in your culture. And you sort of can build those things organically when you're in an office. So what can we be doing right now to sustain healthy relationships when we're in a remote work environment?
I think one of the aspects of that is to look toward the cultures where they have long winters, like the Scandinavian cultures, where it's now they have like less than 6 hours of daylight, and they have to really because it's so cold, they have to really hunker down. And I think what those cultures have done, I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's like huji or higi. It's a term about like embracing the simple pleasures of life. And they talk about, what are those simple pleasures? Well, they may be making toast with your grandchild, or it may be bringing flowers in, or having warm blankets and candles. But it's things that try to, you're going to have to create your environment for the next probably 120 days. And many of us in Michigan are probably not going to be seeing people outside of our house for the most part. We're going to be fairly isolated. We're not going to be able to go out to dinners or whatever. So how do we really have to invest in things that are going to make us comfortable? Thinking about spending your money, if you have any extra money, maybe you buy that couch you want to buy that's really comfortable, or you get some nice candles, or you have nice scents. Look how we're dressed today, Steve. I mean, we're dressed more comfortably maybe than we would be, with a tie and a shirt on, which, I'm wearing a nice, really comfortable thing from a company called Marine Layer, which my son told me about, and they're just soft, comfortable clothes. And I've invested in buying clothes from there versus Brooks Brothers, which are, they're permanent press, but they're very uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that that issue of taking comfort in ourself, in it, the soaps that we have, the food that we eat. I heard yesterday from one of my clients that she's taken up cooking during this pandemic, and she follows the New York Times recipes of the week. And it's a whole new thing that she has learned. There's opportunities to learn new games. Chess seems to be happening right now. There's a great TV series called The Queen's Gambit on Netflix.
I have one episode left. Don't tell me.
Okay, all right. I was on number 3 last night, Steve. So
let me go to another question in terms of COVID and COVID crisis and how to avoid that, and that's recreating a virtual water cooler. Because so much of these casual conversations of what did you think about the game, or I've got a great recipe for this, or I tried Sudoku, you can create those, and you can have ground rules. So you can say, let's have a happy hour on Friday, and you can send out a broadcast, and here are the rules. And you can have ground rules. Ground rules, we're not going to talk about the New York Jets. We're not going to talk about have some rules and say, and let's make this theme hobbies. So tell me about your hobby, what you're excited about, and why you'd recommend it. Or tell me about travel, because someday we'll be able to travel again. So you create these virtual around the water cooler, or talk about.
Mike, how are you saying to do that? Like with Zoom, or how would you do that?
I would do that with Zoom. Is free. You can use Zoom, or you can use FaceTime. FaceTime is a great one as well. I get really, really good quality reception with that. And we will let's get together for cocktails on Friday night at 5:30, and we'll sit and we talk about the grandkids, or we talk about the hobbies, or we talk about how we install a Ring doorbell. I mean, we set up topics, and it's very, very enjoyable to do that. And again, you have ground rules, but we're missing the water cooler guy. We're missing.
I think we're also missing, Mike. We're missing the having dinner with people, which is a big thing for a lot of people. So our friends, we have a set of friends that we've had for over 40 years in Cleveland. We live in Ann Arbor, and we really enjoyed traveling together. So we were reminiscing on a phone call the other day about visiting Cape Cod together. And somebody came up with the idea, well, let's have a lobster dinner together. Yeah. So we had a clam bake, and they were in Cleveland and we were in Ann Arbor. We prepared a lobster, and we prepared some clams, and I think we had FaceTime, and we sat down, we set up our iPads, and we had dinner together. And, after about 15 minutes of awkwardness, it was pretty darn good, except they had better desserts than we did. So it was hard to pass those over the phone.
I think what I'm hearing you guys say is part of sustaining relationships is choosing to find time to have live time with somebody else, whether that's over screen, ear to mouth, eyeball to eyeball. If you can get to in person and social distance, great, but it's having the conversation and not let those relationships be fractured because you don't prioritize them.
Not to beat this to death, but that's so important. I did a lot of consulting with Children's Medical Center in Dallas as one of my last kind of major things that I did. And when I was down there, my wife and I would have a glass of wine and dinner together every night. And I would get to see the grandkids, and we would sit in as if we're sitting across the table from one another, and we have a conversation. It was so, it's not, and I'm not there, but it is so important to extend those relationships. Don't give up on those relationships. Otherwise you become isolated.
So we have
and I think this is also an opportunity, Steve, to have what I call reunions, like we have class reunions and things like that. Well, I've created, just for fun of it, neighborhood reunions. So I was able to contact 4 or 5 of the people that grew up on Meadowlark and Oak Park in the 50s and 60s. And I remember all those neighbors. We all played together till dawn, it seemed like, or till the lights went on the street lights. So I was able to find 4 or 5 of them, and we had a virtual phone call. Now, I say phone call because many of them weren't up to date on the technology and didn't feel like could do Zoom. But using my iPhone, I was able to tap in and make it happen for 6 people. And we had a nice phone call. I also have a men's group that had been meeting once a month, and during this COVID, we've been meeting weekly. And when we can meet outside and spread out, we do it that way. When we but every Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we get together with, like Mike said, with a glass of wine or a beer or whatever, but we're in different spaces, but we stay up with each other's lives and stay up with the decisions we have to make. And that kind of community is just beautiful. It's one of those real treasures of life.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wrote an article that was published in CEO World Magazine on the idea of stretching and what we can do when we have a scarcity mindset, and based on a lot of research. And for those of you on the call, what Rob just speaking to really speaks to what we just wrote about, which is this idea of how do you create new and creative ideas that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Rob probably wouldn't even done that if we were in a normal work environment, but we can create actually some pretty interesting new, whether it's family traditions, whether it's memories, because of this scarcity. So kind of leaning into it versus saying, poor me, we don't have this, but saying, what can I do with, the old MacGyver, a paper clip, a match, and a piece of paper, and, somehow creative, wonderful things happen in those kind of environments. So I guess I'd encourage people to lean into that, and you can find that on our website. It's another idea. I know we only have 5 minutes left. There's one last subject I wanted to hit on. And by the way, in the chat, some people are giving some ideas of what they're doing. I'd encourage you to just comment, by the way, as we're talking, if you want to have some best practices on other things that you're doing to build community and relationships, whether it's at work or personally. That would be great to give some ideas here as they're coming in. But last subject is really the inverse of what you two just said. How about those that we have so much time with right now that we're seeing all the time because we are in our home, our spouse, our kids, 2 or 3 people, adult children working all in the same home. How about the relationships when we are together 24/7? What advice or thoughts do you have on sustaining healthy relationships in that environment? And yeah,
I think the best thing is if somebody acts naughty, just put them in the basement for a few minutes. That's the best thing, Steve. Timeouts for adults. How about that? That's a joke.
Well, actually, there's value in that, because there is that whole issue of private time and private space. And to be able to make it very clear that, again, this is the no oblique speak and the accept, respect, secure issue, is that, when I go into my study, and I'm just using it as an example, and I close the door, I'm going to be in there for about an hour. I'm going to be writing some poetry, or I'm going to be doing this. And then I look forward to coming back and joining everybody in another hour or so. Not to hesitate to say, time out, I need some space, or to be able to say, when you're recognizing the nonverbals in the house, Charlie or Ann or little Billy, you look really concerned. What's bothering you? Let's have a talk. So here's an opportunity to dig deeper and to get beyond what is the question, and get beyond the nonverbals, to have those conversations that we very often never have because they're uncomfortable. I heard a 20-year-old who was interviewed the other day, and I don't mean to say anything by saying 20, but the question was, do you do a lot of talking on the phone to your friends? And the response was, oh, no. So that makes it too uncomfortable when I have to have actual relationships. And so we text back and forth. And it was an honest answer. She was not being facetious, that the idea of being able to have this kind of anonymous texting relationship, rather than having face-to-face, tell me more, let's unpack that conversation, people are beginning to fold themselves away. So be cautious of that, Steve. We both need it, and watch out, because it is a sign, and Rob can tell you, if you find yourself becoming increasingly more isolated, that can have a horrific ending.
I want to say something, Steve, about the concern I have about adolescence during this time. Is I think it's been very hard on high schoolers and junior high schoolers who are really getting to that stage where their peers are everything. And to be home and isolated with parents who think they're cool because they listen to music from, Eminem, and Eminem is already like old music to them. They don't even know. But the idea that I'm starting to see a lot of calls from people concerned about their teenagers, and I would encourage those parents to seek therapy, which is also done remotely now, to help those kids adjust and try to find a young therapist who might understand. I wish we could set up some peer counseling for our adolescents, because I think this is the group that's going to suffer the most in the years ahead, the ones that have missed out in their high school experience.
Yeah, as a former high school guidance counselor, I couldn't echo that more, that there's kids developmentally right now who are going to suffer, and don't hesitate to go out and get some professional assistance.
Well, thanks, guys. We are at the top of the hour, so I know we could talk on this forever. Great subject. On behalf of our listeners, I really appreciate the insights and advice and thoughts that you guys have. For those of you that are listening, if we can do anything to help you individually, personally, professionally, feel free to reach out through Lauren or myself, and we can get you in touch with our team. Our next webinar is in about a month, and Lauren just put that in the subject, a very different subject on the training side of our business simulations, and we're going to do a demo of using simulations in the virtual training environment. We just published our training catalog for 2021, so I just wanted to highlight that with you guys as well. And then last, we also published a blog on belonging. It's on our website, and I think it's really, kind of a support tool to this. So we'll put that and a few of the other links of the books and things that Rob and Michael mentioned in our email back to you. Look for an email tomorrow with the recording here. Feel free to share with others if you think it could help personally and professionally. And just thanks again, everybody. Be well. And Michael, Rob, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Steve, for putting us together.
All right, guys.
Cheers.